Hey everyone, this is Jason with Full Circle Insights. Thanks for joining. I can see people actively joining right now, so give us till about 3 minutes after the hour and we'll get started then. Thanks. Hey everyone, thanks for joining the webinar today. We're going to get started in about, let's call it a minute and a half, about 3 minutes after the top of the hour. I see some people are still actively joining, so we'll give everybody time to get settled here. So just give us about another minute or so. Thanks. Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar today. We're going to be talking about funnel metrics for marketing superheroes. Now, before we get into it, and we have a pretty robust debate about what makes a superhero, it is my opinion that marketers and most of the go-to-market orgs in a company are superheroes, but those superheroes need to become that way. Just don't wake up one day and are a superhero. So one of those methods is talking about funnel metrics, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How to become a marketing superhero by optimizing your funnel. So we'll go through a quick agenda. That's understanding the importance of key funnel metrics. Some of this is pretty basic. You may know that. Some of this is a little bit more advanced, maybe something is new to you. And some of it may be just looking for ways to explain to your team why funnel metrics matter and how to do that the best possible way. So that's understanding the importance of funnel metrics. Also, how to use funnel metrics to find optimization opportunities. Right? So much data. We're capturing so much data all the time. How do we use that data to make decisions? How do we use that data to optimize our campaigns, our programs, our relationships with the other go-to-market team? And thirdly, how to optimize for higher conversion. So that's the real key here, right? It's not just optimization for optimization's sake, it's getting higher conversion from stage to stage and ultimately more revenue as we get through the funnel. All right. So who are you listening to now? I realize now I haven't introduced myself. My name is Jason Ferrara. I'm the CEO at Full Circle Insights. I'm there on the right. I'm joined today by Gavin Griffiths. He's our product marketing manager. Gavin and I work closely together every single day, so it's fun to talk to him daily about these topics, and then fun to have him come on and talk here. So Gavin, thanks for making this a part of your day. I appreciate it, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Me too.
All right. So before we get started, I just want to talk briefly about Full Circle Insights. Who are we? What do we do? Maybe you know that, maybe you don't. So, I think the important thing and the best way to talk about who Full Circle Insights is to talk about that extremely uncomfortable moment you have when you're sitting with your boss, whoever that person may be, and that person says, "How's our marketing working? Where are all the leads in the funnel?" And, like possibly the most dreaded question of them all is, what's the ROI on our marketing? Like, that is a really uncomfortable moment because most of us don't have that number or those numbers at hand. Now, Full Circle helps you answer those questions, right? Gives you the confidence to plan and evaluate and optimize your marketing data. So that really what you end up doing is focusing your budget on campaigns that drive revenue. Full Circle is a Salesforce native product. And why that matters is because the data that comes from marketing and the data that comes from sales is already in Salesforce. And that is the data that you're able to use to plan, to evaluate, and to optimize. So that's a bit about Full Circle. We will move on and we'll get started talking about alignment on funnel stages. Before we do, I do want to mention that there's the chat functionality in Zoom here. There's also a Q&A function in Zoom. So you are welcome to ask questions whenever you want. I monitor that, Gavin monitors that. And if we have questions, we will answer those when we get to the end of our time today. So ask questions, feel free, follow up with us after, all good stuff, all okay. So let's talk about optimizing funnel stages. Let's talk about alignment on those funnel stages. So first things first, this traditional view of a sales funnel as a linear thing isn't really accurate, right? People, inquiries, leads, whatever you want to call them, contacts, or whatever accounts, whatever, they don't follow a linear path all the time. And so what tends to happen when you think about your marketing, your go-to-market strategies, when you think about that as a linear path, what happens is you begin to lose some of those people. They fall out of the process. Now, you're never going to get 100% of them. We all know that too. But it was really more focused on a life cycle model where a response leads to qualification, whether that's your team qualifying or whether that's the prospect qualifying themselves. And then nurturing, right? Just like any human relationship, you have to work on those. You have to nurture them. Like, there's a reason that nobody's walking up to your front door, knocking on the door and selling you a vacuum cleaner anymore. Because maybe that worked in the past, but today's consumer of anything is a lot more savvy. They look for this information. They're nurturing themselves in some cases. And so really you have to look at a evolution of this concept called a funnel as a life cycle. Now, the easiest way to talk about a funnel is as a linear thing, but I'll show you how at Full Circle and at Forrester, and thinking of this as a life cycle rather than simply a linear thing. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But really important, think linearly. You're going to lose more than if you think about a life cycle, because you're actually going to think about the human beings in the process, and that's probably the most important. So let's get on to funnel stage alignment. All right. At the most basic, right, we're going to talk in the most basic of terms. There is a top of the funnel, there's a middle of the funnel, and there's a bottom of the funnel. And that is not new information for anybody here. But what's important when we talk about alignment and optimization is everybody in your go-to-market motion needs to understand these three parts of the funnel because there's a reason they all exist. Some businesses are totally focused on the top of the funnel because they need to jumpstart demand generation or enter a new market. And one of the things you want to be able to do is generate some awareness. So you're driving for top of funnel. You may have hired an agency to help you with some advertising, and they may say to you, this is a tofu strategy, TOFU, tofu. It's a top of the funnel strategy, and they're right. And top of the funnel strategies, a lot of times, are content marketing strategies. And content is king in a lot of ways, but if you're cranking out the content, you are already engaging in a top of funnel strategy. So you need to understand what your strategy is and where the people who are interacting are going to end up. Top of the funnel, middle of the funnel. To me, the middle of the funnel is characterized by driving efficiency, communicating across teams, beginning to score your prospects more accurately, to drive some clarity. Who's here? The start of the qualification process, right? The handoff between what marketing brings in and what sales is going to work on. That happens at the middle of that funnel too, which is why communication and efficiency is so important. That's your part of your strategy in the middle of the funnel. That's where you need to talk about that. And then the bottom of the funnel, right? This is when we begin to talk about opportunities. What's the definition of something that's in your quote unquote pipeline as is an opportunity, right? What's the close rate of those? What's the attribution of things that are closing? Gavin's going to get into a whole bunch of this as we move further into the presentation today. But my point is these really basic fundamental three pieces of a funnel, you've got to have alignment across the teams. Now, you don't have to talk about it for hours and hours and hours. Maybe you do, but you have to have the conversation. And then we can dig a little bit deeper. Right? Forrester has really been, for a very long time, one of the organizations that has built out this concept of a funnel. Demand waterfall is what they call it. And how you label, optimize, work with a funnel. This picture happens to be from what was probably their first real publication of the demand waterfall in 2006. Now, that's a long time ago, but the reality is these basic pieces, just like here, top of the funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel, these basic pieces are still highly important to be aligned on with the rest of the go-to-market team. What happens to an inquiry and how does it become a marketing qualified lead? What's the conversion there? What happens to a marketing qualified lead? How does it become a sales accepted lead? What does sales say? I'll take that on. Same with marketing qualified or sales qualified. What does sales say is a qualified lead to them? And then as we get through closed won, obviously there's the flip side of closed won is closed lost. But that's really important to understand. That is really important to understand in terms of the funnel metrics. And the next picture we have is a much more complex funnel. This is the most recent Forrester demand waterfall. It's a much different picture than this picture, right? It's a much more complicated, complex picture. But what's most important in both of these pictures is like the consistency with which you execute your strategy. But let's talk about that next picture, right? This more complicated one, because this is where we get into talking about life cycle. So if you look at the left side, the light green side of this waterfall, you're looking at targeted accounts, targeted opportunities, who's detected, engaged, prioritized, qualified. The wording is starting to shift, right? The wording is starting to shift more toward an account focus than a people focus, although this funnel could apply to people just the same. And then if you look at the right side, you see from one, you've got an arrow going out to the right, back up to the top where it says current customers. Because the reality is that your current customers are engaging with your marketing as well as your prospects. I'll give you a great example. I know right now for a fact that there are current customers of Full Circle Insights on this webinar. And that's great because we want to be able to communicate who we are, what we do, why we care, how you work with a funnel, how you optimize that to everybody, not just prospects, but to our customers too. It's useful information. Now we have to start thinking, once we've had this interaction, what's our follow-up? What does that funnel motion, what does that go-to-market motion look like for a client as well, or a prospect as well as a client, right? Clients are involved. We have to have that conversation. And that's what Forrester's trying to do in this most recent update to their demand waterfall. It is a more complex picture, but the reality is it's covering the same pieces of information. And my advice is, you've got to start here, then you've got to understand these parts of the funnel, and then you can move on to the more complicated picture and think through, what does this mean for not just prospects, but for current customers. So that's a little bit about the funnel, right? What does yours look like? What's your alignment across your teams? What are those conversations that you're having? What does your strategy look like? All of those items need to be discussed and need to be consistent as you move forward. Because the next pieces we're going to start talking about is optimizing all those stages. Now, Gavin, I know you've waited to jump in for some time here, so now's your chance. Let's start talking a little bit more about specific optimization.
Yeah. So kind of digging into details around optimization and leveraging the funnel data, there's three key dimensions of the data that you need to use to optimize, and these are volume, velocity, and conversion. So these dimensions are going to help you understand not just the quantity and quality of your demand generation, but it's also going to help kind of leverage a lot of insight around the campaign efforts. So kind of like a box that says multiple dimensions, so you can measure, think height, width, and length, and how you're going to be able to like leverage these three metrics to effectively make the most out of your funnel data. And so obviously, like, volume is the most obvious basic metric. It's the sheer number count of leads in the funnel, or number of leads that are at a specific stage in the funnel. But it can also count towards the number of pipeline opportunities in terms of potential revenue dollars. And then for conversion is identifying the rate at which leads progress from one stage to another. Essentially, it's a division of two volume quantities, either a later funnel stage volume or numerator divided by an earlier funnel stage. That's a big word salad for basically saying, hey, we have 1,675 MQLs, 500 have progressed to SAL, so we know that the stage that comes after MQL. So basically, we're taking the 500 SALs divided by the 1,675 MQLs that came in, and gives us a total conversion rate of 29.8%. So pretty good on looking at that. And then digging into velocity is identifying the number of days that a lead or a segment of leads takes to move from one funnel stage to the next. And so this measurement's really helpful in determining how many leads you'll realistically need to generate to contribute to deals closed in a given quarter, because velocity is going to give you that baseline for the average length of a sales cycle. So using these three funnel dimensions, you can understand the life cycle of your leads from beginning to end, the sheer quantity of leads in your funnel and the quality of those leads, and at the speed at which they move from one stage to the next. And we'll get into how you're going to be able to really use that moving forward to not just make projections around where you need to be in order to hit your revenue goals, but how to leverage that for making optimizations and improving your marketing as things are progressing through.
Yeah, Gavin, velocity is interesting too, because there's a way that the velocity question gets asked a lot that doesn't use the word velocity. And so the way that I ask this question and the way that I'm asked this question by board members, for example, would be, how long, what's your SLA? That's what I'm always asked. What's your SLA for someone to touch an MQL? And what people want to know is SLA, meaning service level agreement, right? How long does it take a person on the sales team to interact with an MQL? And that's a velocity metric. And that's one of the ways that velocity is used in practice. How long should that take? There's the classic, you've got to respond to a lead in an hour. That classic thing. So your SLA could be 1 hour. Your SLA may be 1 day. But I guarantee if you're not measuring it, if you're not measuring that velocity, it's not what you want it to be. So that's how that question gets asked, and how velocity gets used. That dimension of funnel metrics gets used often in my experience. Obviously, conversion is key. In fact, I've talked in my day job when I'm not doing webinars. I've had 2 conversations this morning already about conversion from stage to stage with 2 different people in the business. And then volume. I mean, Gavin, in the practice session before the webinar, you and I were just talking about volume, right? We were talking about registrants for the webinar. We were talking about past, present, what we want to see in the future. That's a volume conversation, right? And those are all pieces of the funnel.
Yeah. And to kind of put this into a summary, as we dig into kind of like how to leverage these trends and the patterns in the data, like one of the most common ways we see, and we recommend leveraging that volume, velocity, and conversion rate data is effectively identifying, saying, hey, we have a revenue goal of, let's say you have a revenue goal of $10 million. And what these volume and conversion rates are going to basically tell you is say, okay, hey, we know what our MQL to close one deal conversion rate is. It might be 3%. And then we have our average deal size, let's say it's $50,000. So you're going to take that $10 million revenue target divided by your average deal size to get the total number of won deals you're going to need to reach that deal. And then divide that by your MQL to one conversion rate to I tell you exactly what you're going to need to hit an MQL volume in order to reach that goal. And then where the velocity rate comes in there is that time frame of like how like in what time frame can we realistically reach that revenue goal within there. And so and expanding out and leveraging this to make optimizations around that funnel, like kind of picking up where you left off, Jason, around what's our SLA. Worked and unworked MQLs. So huge benefit of really tying in that SLA around that worked and unworked MQLs is really going to go into like making sure that stuff's not being left behind in the funnel. So if marketing's bringing in new marketing qualified leads and they're getting in here, this is where you can identify, hey, this month we have 800 new MQLs that have come in the last couple of weeks, and of that 800 MQLs, 600 of those have been either in a combination of either been dispositioned out of the funnel or put into a nurture sequence, or they've been advanced to sales accepted and they're currently being worked by the sales team. But we still have 200 MQLs that are just sitting there. So having that metric and being able to identify that also really enables you to not just identify and manage your SLAs, but really make sure that you're not leaving money on the table by having unworked MQLs just sitting there and being unnoticed by sales or something else kind of going into the funnel around that.
Yeah, it's super important, Gavin. And one of I learned this from an old boss. Okay, and this is something I still use today, and I still talk about today when I see unworked MQLs. My first thought is something is broken. a part of our process is broken. Because one of the core agreements that you'd have as a go-to-market team is I'm going to drive some MQLs and here's what's going to happen to them. I'm going to score them and then I'm going to pass them along in this way. Like people do that. They do that work. The optimization for me at this stage is if I see a lot of unworked MQLs, my first response is not to go hot-headed into the sales team. My first response is to say, what part of our automation is broken? And I will tell you 9 times out of 10, something is broken. Very infrequently is it the SDR team or the sales team is not working the MQLs at that high level stage if you've got a lot of unworked MQLs. So just a little bit of color there from my experience.
Yeah, totally. And then leveraging the disposition reasons by the sales reps. So part of that I mentioned for those worked MQLs, not all of those are going to be qualified. And this is where that single source of truth of making sure that sales and marketing are working off the same data set really comes into play. Because if something gets marked as dispositioned, and that could be like disqualified for a number of reasons. It could be an MQL that came in from a competitor, a student filled out a form that someone applied for a job, or it could just be people that don't meet your ICP for your products. And having that information is so valuable to the marketing team, because if you're dispositioning these MQLs and tying that back to the campaign level, that gives extremely valuable feedback to the marketing team, because then they can identify and say, okay, hey, our conversion rate for this MQL campaign was 25%. Let's look at the 75% that didn't convert from MQL to SAL. What were the reasons for this? Do we need to adjust the targeting around our campaign? Are we what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? And so having those disposition reasons, not just at the MQL level, but also at every stage of the funnel, is going to give really valuable feedback and insight around your sales process and the lead quality that's coming in from the efforts of marketing.
Yeah, that disposition. So, early in this webinar, I had the very simplified funnel up there, top, middle, bottom, even. MQL disposition is incredibly important. It's data that is super rich in information, but it's also an area where you have to simplify. It can't be too complex for anybody to interact with it. If you're going to take the time to ask people for disposition reasons, you need to take the time to have it be thoughtful and simple to use. Otherwise, you lose all that data. So there's another optimization trick, which is sweat those details. What are the disposition reasons? You can't have a drop down with 300 items in it, and you can't have one with 4, because then where'd they all go? There's no fidelity if you don't have enough choices. But so you're striking this balance between what's enough and what's not enough. But that is a really important part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And in identifying those qualifiers too, not just for like the disposition reasons, but things progressing to one stage from the next. I mean, that really could depend as well as around tying into what kind of campaigns you're running, or the value level of the lead that came in. You might be getting something that came in that has to do with like an immediate demo request and might be immediately qualified to advance that, or it could be like this example, like people just looking for more information and best practices that are signing up for a webinar, and that might go into a nurture sequence to get them more engaged with more content and just keep that conversation going. But moving into like kind of the next piece on this is also around like the volume as it relates to velocity. So when you're looking at optimizing your funnel and things that are currently in pipeline, you're going to notice that at certain stages of your funnel, things are going to be slowing down or going really fast. And so if you're noticing like specific conversion rates are dropping down, or velocity rates are going really high and it's taking a long time, there's certain questions you might want to ask yourself. It's like, hey, our velocity rate went through the roof. We went from a 2-day turnaround time to 14-day. Are we overwhelming sales with too much volume and it's harming conversion and velocity? or are deals just not getting attention in a timely manner, or some sales just better performers than others in there. And so having that insight around the volume as it relates to velocity is a huge thing. And then, moving into KPI monitoring at each stage, which stages have the best velocity and conversion rates. Do we have arbitrary processes? So like if you notice in your funnel, hey, we are consistently seeing a 0 velocity rate going from SAL to SQL. Are we tracking something that's redundant that the sales reps are just skipping entirely, and or are we looking at the wrong part of our sales process here to identify where we can make improvement pieces here? If something's really long, it might not have to do with volume entirely. It could be a bottleneck in the process where it's like, hey, we might need to streamline part of our sales process in order to get efficiency up and drive things through pipeline even faster. And so, identifying these stages and trends is gonna give you data to make informed decisions to constantly improve and basically optimize your entire process as a whole. So
the items we've talked to so far: unworked MQLs, MQL disposition, MQL metrics is very top, bordering on middle of the funnel. It's important to have those MQL metrics, but MQL metrics are not where you stop, right? The marketing team may be used to stopping at MQL, but the marketing team needs to push through the rest of the funnel to understand those metrics. And really, that's why I think this is a go-to-market problem, solution, challenge, than it is just a marketing or sales thing. If you're running into the sales team hot-headed because of your metrics, you're not thinking collectively about what's important. And that's where we get into SAL, SQL, and opportunity. So, Gavin, we talked about that top of the funnel. What kind of things when you speak to our clients, right, and you talk to them about those late middle stage to low, bottom stage funnel metrics, SAL, SQL, opportunity, what are the conversations that you have? What do people want to know, and what do you spend time talking with them about?
Yeah. And so this is where I really tie this back to kind of when I mentioned at the beginning of how you're leveraging your funnel data to be able to determine and say like, hey, based off this revenue target, in these conversion rates and velocity rates, this is what we need to generate in QL volume to be able to reach that ultimate revenue goal within a certain time period. And a big conversation on this, because everything is so process focused at the top of the funnel. This marketing to sales handoff and sales, qualifying the lead and then creating an opportunity. But the next piece of this is so very important on this, and this is where I have that conversation with customers quite a bit, and how to leverage the data is around opportunity coverage. And so going into kind of the revenue side of it, once something becomes an opportunity, it's marketing's not necessarily done here, because marketing needs to also be monitoring and be aware of this as sales is continue to chomp through and process deals. And that's gonna come down to hitting that ultimate revenue goal. So at the top of the funnel, you're looking at the conversion rates for that sales process, marketing and sales handoff process, like I mentioned earlier. But once it becomes an opportunity, it switches from process oriented to revenue focused. And so at the SQL level, when you have an opportunity that's been created, you might not be converting all of those opportunities into close won deals, and you're not going to convert all those opportunities into close won deals. And so this is where the opportunity coverage piece really comes into play, where you have a direct knowledge and know that, hey, what we're seeing based off past data is that we're converting 25% of our opportunities into close won deals. So if you have a $10 million revenue goal, you're gonna, and your conversion rate from opportunity creation to opportunity close is 25%. Realistically, you're going to need to have 4 times that revenue amount in pipeline in order to hit that revenue goal in a timely manner. So if you want to go into the next slide here.
Yeah, can I talk? Absolutely, I want to do that, but I want to talk quickly about qualification from stage to stage.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
because I think that this is another area where optimization is incredibly important,
Hmm.
and it's a go-to-market question, not a sales or marketing question. And so when something gets qualified to a sales accepted lead,
Hmm.
there's a criteria that the sales team has that they're going to look at a lead and they're say, "Yep, I want to spend my time on that. I think that looks like somebody who could be a customer." Right? And that's an incredibly high level, basic way to think about it. But that's one way in which we use our ideal customer profile. Right? So our ideal customer profile is: do you use Salesforce? Do you use campaigns in Salesforce? Are you a company that is of a certain size? And those are three big qualifiers for going from an MQL to an SAL, because then the SAL enables that second level of qualification. You look like the kind, on the surface, you look like the kind of company or person that could be a customer. But then the sales team's job is to get in there and say, and that's great. I'm glad that's what you look like. Let's dig deeper. Let's get to know you a little bit more, right? What's the size of the problem? What is the problem that you have, and what's the size of that problem? And you know, there are all sorts of different qualification process, and I was just about ready to launch into a little thing about BANT, but you know, there's MEDDIC, and there are a bunch of other qualification processes. Um, the sales team needs to have that qualification process. The marketing team needs to understand that that's their qualification process. And then there needs to be a mechanism to document that those questions have been asked and answered for carryover to the next stage. I don't know, Gavin, how you talk to clients, and they are they sweating that? Are they talking about that? Is that an afterthought? Does everybody have that? Like, what's that conversation? What does that look like with the client?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that comes up quite a bit. And just to your point, yeah, like the customer profile is a big part of that and identifying that within the process. You know, in sales, when that sales gets that handed that MQL and they're making the determination of qualifying it to SAL or even to opportunity creation. Yeah, that's exactly it. They're looking at the company profile, but there's also other pieces on how they leverage that as well. And part of that's how they're tying in things like their marketing automation that's automating a lot of processes
Mm-hmm.
around that to help kind of
Mm-hmm.
pre-screen things before they even get to sales, even outside of the MQL. So there, like, a lot of that work's being done by marketing as much as possible up front, but yeah, once it's gone through kind of all the checks and balances from the marketing team on that handoff, and then sales digs in, yeah, they're very much looking at that customer profile. You know, they're trying to, you know, establish that line of communication and engage with them to get more information and make that determination. Like, hey, yeah, based on this information or this company profile, let's move them up to sales accepted. Let's continue working this. Or they might look at it and say, yeah, I see your interest, but the reality is, you know, I don't think you're going to be a good fit, and here's why due to these reasons for that. And so it's kind of a balancing act in between, you know, leveraging the automation through your marketing automation tools as they tie into Salesforce, but also making sure that there's a clear line of communication between sales and marketing. So you know, sales knows exactly what to do to ask those questions, but marketing's very well aware of that as well when they're making that handoff and driving these new leads into pipeline.
Yep. And I was in an interview yesterday with someone. I was talking about qualification with this person, and I said, my question was, how do you find out about budget and need and pain and time frame and all those things that we want to know, that are kind of hard to ask sometimes. And this person looked at me and he said, you know, you got to ask. You just ask. People will tell you what they want to tell you, you know, and I think that's an important part of qualifying from stage to stage. What's the process to ask those questions? Sometimes it can be automated, sometimes it can't. Whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to get documented then in Salesforce so that you can then report on that stuff. All right, I stopped you from going to the next slide, so now I'll do you the favor of going to the next slide because you were on a roll, ready to talk about opportunity coverage, and I'd love to talk about that. So keep on your roll there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier with that Forrester waterfall. So really leveraging that data and identifying, because ultimately the sales and marketing team are going to have goals established for them. They're going to leadership is going to say like, hey, we have a goal of doing $10 million in revenue or $20 million in revenue, whatever it is, and it's going to be marketing's job to make that determined based off the funnel data and their engagements with sales to say, okay, this is what we need to do in order to reach that goal. And so we've talked a lot about optimizing and identifying and managing that data at the top of the funnel. But when things get into the opportunity creation, marketing's not done. They really are not done. This is their time to shine, and this is when they're going to be working on that deal to bring in a new potential customer and book that revenue. But this is also going to be an indication to make sure that marketing knows that they're on track. And so with those conversion rates that you're tracking on there, this is where you can really identify and say like, hey, how effective are we at, or how effective are we at closing our opportunities from opportunity creation to opportunity close? And what's that timeline look like on how long it takes to get those deals through pipeline? And understanding this coverage piece is so important because it really changes the dynamic of the conversation around process and qualification to, hey, do we have enough revenue in pipeline to make sure that we're going to hit our goals? And so knowing what that conversion rate is from opportunity creation to opportunity close is going to allow you to really monitor and make sure that you're on track to hit that revenue goal. And so this is where it's just coming down to that really simple equation of if you have a 25% conversion rate of opportunity creation to close one deal and you have a $10 million revenue goal, you're going to need to have $40 million in pipeline based off historical data to reach that $10 million goal. And so this later stage at the bottom of the funnel is very, very important to be able to track. And it's a really simple math equation. Now, I mean, there's always more complexity that goes into that. I don't mean to oversimplify it and premise, because you might have different varying levels of like product suites or partnership agreements or all these other things to come into play. And you can break those in and segment them out. But this is where and how you can better manage that data and be able to really know where you're at and hitting that. So you're basically eliminating as many surprises as possible and really planning ahead more than anything.
Yep. And I'm glad you said that about complexity, because I think two things are really important. One is, it is a pretty simple math equation. How much revenue do you need? What is in your pipeline? At your current close rate, will you be driving that amount of revenue? I mean, that's a relatively simple math equation. However, getting there is a challenge still. And it's a challenge for your finance team, and it's a challenge for the marketing team, that's a challenge for the sales team, that's a challenge for the customer success team, who's probably on the hook for renewals in some way. And what's most important here is that everybody knows you are asking this question. Because once you start asking this question, you begin to uncover the data. Do we have the right data? Is it organized in the right way? I've seen this happen a lot, and I've been members of marketing teams where this has happened a lot. Once you pull your data out of Salesforce and analyze it somewhere else, the perceived value of that data goes down. Well, because you pulled it out and you've done something with it and you've changed it in some significant way, it's no longer accurate. That's the general thought about that, which is why being able to do that with inside Salesforce is super important, which is why Gavin and I have just been talking about disposition reasons documented in Salesforce. All these different velocity stages documented somehow in Salesforce, because that's an area where the go-to-market team comes together. It's the It's the village green, so to speak, where you come together to put the data, right? Because that's where everybody's keeping their data. And so as long as the data is there, you can analyze it and you can make sense of it and you can believe in it. And so, yes, simple math equation that is a challenge to get to the right answer. But once you start asking that question, you now will be able to find that data. And in some cases, I've been a part of teams like this too. In some cases, you don't keep that data. There's some data that you're not keeping. You say, oh, well, we should probably start keeping that data. Keep track of that so we can now address it and analyze it. It's a really important part of that opportunity coverage at the end of the funnel.
Yeah.
And I'll say one other thing, Gavin, and then give the floor back to you briefly. Is the important thing for marketing. I know I've been saying, hey, this is a go-to-market problem, but or issue, and solutions are there. The important thing for marketing is to follow the data all the way through to closed won or closed lost, because that's where you learn the most. I've got attribution that resulted in an inquiry converted to an MQL. And if you end at MQL, you don't know what is happening. But when you end at closed lost or closed won, then you're able to look at attribution and say, whoa, this thing we thought was not important, less important, more important, may or may not be what we thought it was, because now we're looking at that attribution data all the way through the funnel. So this is an area where marketing needs to still be an active member of the go-to-market team and not give up on the analysis at the end of the funnel. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Kevin.
Yeah, I do. This actually comes from a question in the Q&A. It ties in perfectly because I was going to wrap this up on the opportunity coverage. So this came in. It was right around and the question is, how do you gauge this opportunity coverage if your time spent is 12 plus months?
Yeah.
And I assume the question has to do with hey, what if your pipeline takes 12 months to get a deal from inception of a new lead through a closed won opportunity? Yeah. And that's
how do you feel comfortable? How do you feel comfortable spending that money to know that it's, when you don't know what's going to happen 12 months from now? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where that velocity part of this really comes into play, because if you know your conversion rates as they relate to your velocity on this, that's really where you can effectively plan out and identify that and say hey, we know our average deal takes XYZ number of months to get through pipeline, and this is what our conversion rates are getting through this. So because you have that velocity in conjunction with the conversion rates for that and the volume metrics all tied together with revenue, those three combined allow you to really effectively make that determination. So that way you can say, okay, hey, we know based off historical data, we can look at this and go, if we spent this amount of money here, we generated XYZ number of MQLs. This is the percentage that progressed through each stage of the funnel and how long it's taking us to get to this. And then later on tying in the attribution metrics on top of that to be able to see what's working best and what's working, what needs improvement. That's where you can tie that in, and that velocity metric on there is really what's going to allow you to gauge that. So that way, when you're making those decisions around okay, hey, where do we put our marketing dollars here to be able to fill our pipeline effectively and do stuff that works, you're leveraging that velocity metric on top of that conversion rate to be able to make that informed determination of where to put your marketing spend. And there's varying levels of attribution models you can tie into this. I mean, depending on what kind of marketing channels you're using. But yeah, and there's so much that goes into that. But those three metrics of that volume, conversion, and velocity are really what's going to allow you to really be able to gauge that as it relates back to how effective your marketing efforts are.
Yep. Sorry, I went to the question queue and I just moved around our slides a little bit. It gets me thinking, and this question came in. It's really an important one because I was trying to formulate a statement about this even before I saw that question, which is, what if you don't have any of this data? This is really interesting, important, but what if you don't have the data? And that is also something that I'm sure, Gavin, you hear a ton of when you talk to brand new clients, because sometimes they're not tracking all this data. So I'll give my answer in general from a business management perspective, and then we kind of move into what a good how you can begin to do that from an actual tactical collect the data standpoint. But this is where, number one, that conversation and understanding of the funnel is so important, because if you don't have the data, it is likely because no one has connected the dots of, here's our funnel, here's our strategy that results in we want our funnel to look like this. This is what our mind's eye tells us and what our strategy would tell us. There is some back of the napkin math you can do, like here are best practice conversion rates from stage to stage. Like those sorts of things are all really good to be able to use, because you have to get an idea, right? You have to get an idea of what it's like. It's sort of like going to a batting cage, right? It's not really baseball or a driving range or whatever the practice is. It's not really that sport. You're not playing baseball, but you're practicing that idea, and that's something you can do with best practice data and discussion around funnel metrics. And then, once you know what's important in your funnel, you do. I mean, it's quite as simple as you start collecting it. But then I know that, Gavin, you talk about other ways to do this in Salesforce, and my guess is companies have much more data in Salesforce than they actually are aware of. So you want to talk a little bit about that concept there?
Yeah. So, because that conversation's come up quite a bit in the past of, what if we don't have this funnel data? What if we don't have velocity and conversion rates for that? And I my answer to that is start with your process. And look at ensuring that you have consistency, because like any business organization that's selling something, they almost always have some kind of inline process for how they're working deals and pushing things through pipeline. And so if you don't have this data, look at your process and identify trends within that, because you're going to be able to see, not as clearly without the funnel data, but you're going to be able to identify some level of trends to be able to make the determination of, like, where things are having a positive impact, where things need to have improvements made. But having that consistency is going to make a big difference, and also making sure that you don't have things that kind of negate other processes. So if we kind of earlier on, you showed different funnels between like a marketing funnel and a sales funnel, or maybe a partner funnel. These all might have different trigger criteria for like how they advance to the next stage, but ultimately, like, one can't supersede the other in sense of how that process is being obtained. And so if you don't have this funnel data, it's a huge challenge to be able to accurately measure and plan for this. But having consistency in your processes is going to really make a big world of difference on being able to leverage that. And then if you have this funnel data on top of that, especially built out in your CRM, then it becomes a much easier process to be able to make those determinations and have really well informed decision making.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gavin. I think this is a good spot to do a little bit of summary, right? So we talked about understanding the importance of key funnel metrics, and I would say this concept of agreeing on the funnel stages, the very basic top, middle, bottom, to sort of the mid-level basic, like what are all the stages, to the very complicated, how do we fit accounts into there? How do we deal with clients? How do we track from stage to stage to stage? So I think that's one of the ways that you can understand the importance of funnel metrics. Using funnel metrics to find optimization opportunities. We talked about velocity and volume and conversion. Three relatively simple concepts, but very powerful when they're applied dynamically to optimize each stage, identifying the patterns and focus on the bottom of the funnel, right? When you apply those three data dimensions to the data in your funnel, you will begin to see areas for optimization and understand those. And I think to the point we were just talking about, what if you don't have the data? Some data does exist, and it's important to begin to use that data. Yes, I think that's the third comment that I'd have, is start using the data that you have to ask and answer the questions and see where the gaps and the holes are. And that's really, the key way to optimize funnel stages there. So that's our summary for optimizing every funnel stage, how to be an optimization superhero. I think it's important to have these conversations as a go-to-market team and really understand what's important and what the data currently looks like and where you want to go. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been great. Thank you for the questions. I love it when the question queue has questions in it. Much more fun for Gavin and I to go off script a little bit and talk a little bit about some of those more burning questions that are out there. We'd love to have you join us each month for our webinar series. Our next webinar is Building a Data-Driven Marketing Culture, and that's happening November 15th. So right before Thanksgiving, we'll dig in on building a data-driven marketing culture. You can register for that webinar today at the Full Circle Insights website, fullcircle.com, fullcircleinsights.com/webinars, and you'll see the November webinar there. Thanks so much for your attendance today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, let us know, and hopefully we'll see you at another webinar. Thanks.